It was an amazing story, honoring an amazing period of time and a group of individuals.
For 5 decades, Ron Howard has been Hollywood's nice guy director. No shouting, no tantrums, no storming off set. He leads with calm, with gentle notes, with the belief that respect is the cleanest fuel for creativity. But behind that warm smile lies a quieter truth. Even the kindest man has limits. And Howard's limits tend to surface when actors confuse ego with artistry. Our story opens on Night Shift, the studio breakthrough that launched his big-screen directing career in 1982. The film paired Henry Winkler with Michael Keaton. The atmosphere was controlled freedom. Keaton's improvisations crackled. Winkler anchored the rhythm, and Ron orchestrated the flow. Then Shelley Long arrived, smart, incisive, perfect on paper, and friction began. Crew members recall Long bringing total control energy, every camera angle, every comma in the dialogue, every blocking beat became a negotiation. Unlike Keaton's improvisational current, she wanted each take locked from the first shot. Howard, the kind of filmmaker who chases discovery in the moment, found himself spending hours explaining instead of staging. Tension peaked on a pivotal scene when Long pressed for multiple script changes, holding the production for hours. One assistant remembered Ron's face. He didn't blow up. He started planning how to work around her instead of with her. Howard stays diplomatic. In 1906, he spoke about difficult collaborations. Some actors arrive with their minds made up. When there's no room for discovery, it's hard to find magic. From the other side, Shelley Long had her rationale. In 1995, she said, "I come prepared." Some directors mistake questions for challenges. To her, rigor was professionalism. To Ron, collaboration was the higher discipline. Night Shift wrapped, but the lesson stuck. Howard wants a set to be a symphony everyone heard, but the conductor keeps time. After working with Shelley Long, he steered away from energies that turn scenes into power struggles. Not because he can't tolerate disagreement, but because he knows trust is a film's heartbeat. When actors arrive determined to win rather than co-create, the life inside the frame dims. That's why, in later projects, Howard gravitated toward performers who are disciplined and humble, people who show up to build, not to battle. And it's why, though he rarely speaks ill of anyone, he almost never recalls Shelley Long as a happy memory. No vendetta, just parting ways born from irreconcilable process. In Hollywood, kind doesn't mean permissive. Ron Howard may smile and yield the floor, but once a film's pulse is threatened by ego, he'll stand firm to protect the orchestra. That, more than anything, is why he's earned the reputation as the most dependable man on set. Not every storm on set comes from ego. Some storms come from within, from pain, addiction, and the kind of broken rhythm that fame cannot heal. Tom Sizemore was one of those storms. In 1996, Ron Howard was at the height of his powers. After Apollo 13, he was known as Hollywood's golden craftsman, disciplined, steady, incapable of losing control. His next project, Ransom, starring Mel Gibson and Rene Russo, promised to be a taut, professional thriller until Tom Sizemore arrived. On paper, Sizemore was perfect, raw, magnetic, dangerous, but he brought with him the ghosts of his own undoing drugs. Sleepless nights, unpredictable energy, Crew members remember days when he'd show up late. Eyes bloodshot, energy erratic, brilliant. One moment, vacant the next. No one knew which Tom would walk on set that day, the artist or the implosion. Ron Howard doesn't yell. He doesn't fight chaos with chaos. He fights it with silence and structure. One production assistant recalled Ron didn't argue. He just quietly shifted camera setups, reblocked scenes, and moved the crew out of Tom's way like building a wall of calm around a hurricane. In 1994, Howard admitted, "Some days, I had to rebuild the entire schedule around one person's unpredictability. It kills the rhythm, and worse, it kills trust." The breaking point came during a tense confrontation scene with Mel Gibson. Sizemore's behavior spiraled, lines forgotten, mood swinging. Then, a sudden walkout mid-scene. Howard paused the shoot. No yelling, no slammed doors. He simply stepped aside, picked up the phone, and told the producer, "We need to protect this movie from itself." That's how Ron Howard gets angry, through action, not noise. Production lost 2 full days recovering from that meltdown. Sizemore finished his role, but the damage was done. In the final cut, many of his scenes were trimmed or replaced. When Sizemore passed away in 2023, Hollywood offered tributes. Ron Howard offered silence. No statements, no tweets, only silence. Which, for him, was the kindest farewell possible, a boundary wrapped in empathy. Howard once said, "I don't hate people. I just avoid the ones who turn movies into battlefields." And in his eyes, Tom Sizemore wasn't an enemy. He was a lesson. Ransom succeeded at the box office. But Howard never forgot what it felt like to direct in a storm. It reaffirmed his belief that a true director isn't the one who yells action, but the one who knows when to whisper, cut, to save the soul of the film itself. Before Ron Howard became Hollywood's gentlest storyteller, he was a red-haired boy with wondering eyes, little Opie Taylor on The Andy Griffith Show. At just 6 years old, he called Andy Griffith Dad before he fully understood what acting meant. They were America's image of kindness in the 1960s, the compassionate father and his curious son, living in the fictional town of Mayberry, where every problem could be solved with patience and love. But behind the scenes, life was less forgiving. As Ron grew older, he began to realize that the man adored by millions wasn't always the same man when the cameras stopped rolling. Andy Griffith, at the peak of his television fame, was mercurial, temperamental, and often withdrawn. Crew members recalled that, as the seasons passed, Andy's warmth hardened into tension. Scripts got tighter, smile shorter. Frances Bavier, who played Aunt B, openly disliked him. Don Knotts loved him but feared him. And young Ron learned to read the storm in a person's silence before it broke. In a 1999 interview, Ron reflected, "You learn early how to understand strong personalities, especially the kind that can laugh with you in a scene, then shut down completely between takes." It was his first lesson in power, the gap between image and reality. By the time Ron became a teenager, curious about his craft, asking questions about motivation and tone, Andy reportedly snapped, "Don't overthink it. OP, just do as I say." From then on, the father-son bond began to fray, not from hate, but because Ron had started to grow into his own creative self, while Andy struggled to share control. When The Andy Griffith Show ended in 1968, There were no emotional farewells. They simply went their separate ways, Andy, to new TV projects. Ron toured directing. They never worked together again. When Andy Griffith passed in 2012, Ron's tribute was polite but distant. Andy taught me to love acting. He was a great mentor. No anecdotes. No Mayberry memories. Just distance wrapped in gratitude. Perhaps that was because Andy's true gift wasn't mentorship. It was awakening awareness. He taught Ron that kindness is not innate. It's a choice. Forged from witnessing how cruelty and silence can coexist behind smiling faces. From his TV father, Ron learned the guiding principle of his directing life. What audiences see in front of the camera should reflect what truly happens behind it. And for 50 years, he's lived by that rule. Andy Griffith may have taught America how to smile, but he taught Ron Howard something even harder: how to stay kind. In a world where smiles are just part of the script, no one denies that Russell Crowe is a genius. From Gladiator to A Beautiful Mind, he radiates intensity, raw, magnetic, and terrifyingly real. But for Ron Howard, the calm, methodical conductor of Hollywood sets, Crowe wasn't just a brilliant actor, he was an intelligent storm. In 2001, they came together for A Beautiful Mind, an Oscar dream pairing. Crowe as mathematician John Nash, Howard as the quiet visionary behind the camera. On paper, it was perfection. In reality, it was a collision between two versions of perfection. Crowe approached every day like a battle. He questioned everything: lighting, camera placement, dialogue, tone. An assistant director said Russell never just performed, he occupied the set. Every scene became a psychological experiment. Howard, who believes leadership comes from calm collaboration, suddenly found himself trying to steer a train without brakes. Crowe could deliver brilliance so raw it stunned the crew, then argue for 30 minutes about the philosophical truth of a gesture. Every note from Ron became a negotiation. During one emotional breakdown scene, Howard quietly suggested Crowe ease the intensity to draw empathy from the audience. Crowe stared at him and said, "I don't show up to be liked, Ron. I show up to find truth." It wasn't arrogance, it was conviction. And Howard, ever the diplomat, let him chase that truth. Knowing the price was peace on set, months later, A Beautiful Mind premiered at Triumph. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Everything. But backstage at the Oscars, when asked about Crowe, Howard smiled faintly and said, "With some actors, you guide the scene. With Russell, you just hold the reins and hope the horse doesn't run off a cliff." That was his definition of genius brilliance tethered to chaos. Crowe later commented in 2004, "Ron's a good man, but sometimes he wants things too clean, too safe. Real art isn't safe." Maybe Crowe was right. Maybe Howard was. But they never worked together again, not from anger, but because both knew a lightning strike should only hit once. From that point on, Howard chose his collaborators carefully. He gravitated toward actors who valued trust over turbulence, discipline over drama. A Beautiful Mind gave him his greatest victory, and the greatest lesson of all: that genius and destruction are twin forces, and the director's true power lies not in control, but in knowing when to let go. Sometimes, the biggest win isn't the gold statue, it's surviving the storm that earned it. Before Ron Howard became an Oscar-winning director, he was a young actor, bathed in studio lights. When Happy Days premiered in 1974, Richie Cunningham was America's golden boy wholesome, optimistic. And the heart of the show, then came Henry Winkler, a supporting character named Arthur Fonzie Fonzarelli. Leather jacket, motorcycle, swagger. Within weeks, Fonzie became a cultural earthquake. The audience cheered so loudly the cameras had to pause, and suddenly, the spotlight that once belonged to Ron shifted away not with malice, but with momentum. Crew members remember, every time Fonzie walked in, the room exploded. Ron would smile politely, but you could feel the air change. Howard didn't resent Winkler, he resented the feeling of disappearing. Happy Days. Once his story had become the Fonzie Show. Posters featured Henry, scripts favored his arcs. Ron was still there, but the world had moved on. Years later, he admitted, "I never hated Henry. I just hated losing the center I worked so hard to build." But that's when I learned no one owns the spotlight forever. At the show's peak, Ron made the unthinkable decision to walk away. He left Happy Days, not out of anger, but out of clarity to step behind the camera and build stories of his own. Henry soared, Ron rebuilt. And from that quiet act of retreat came one of Hollywood's greatest second acts. Decades later, Winkler reflected, "Ron has the biggest heart. He taught me that when someone else shines, you smile, because that light reflects a little of your own work." 2. They remained friends. In 2018, as Winkler accepted his Emmy, he said on stage, "Ron Howard, if you're watching, thank you for teaching me that kindness never goes out of style. That once silent rivalry became a lifelong bond and a lesson etched into Ron's directing soul. Sometimes leadership means stepping aside so others can glow, because true mastery isn't standing in the light, it's knowing when to step back and let others bask in it." After Apollo 13, Ron Howard was Hollywood's symbol of control and optimism, the man who turned complexity into clarity. So when he teamed up with Mel Gibson for Ransom in 1996, the industry expected harmony between two masters. But on set, where only one captain can steer, two leaders collided. Gibson was at his zenith. Braveheart had just won him 2 Oscars, giving him both prestige and dominance. Ron, in contrast, was a craftsman of calm precision. Their union promised genius and delivered chaos disguised as brilliance. From day one, Howard saw that Gibson wasn't merely an actor, he was a shadow director. Weighing in on everything, the camera should be lower, the light's too warm, the rhythm needs more punch. At first, Ron listened. He believed collaboration built stronger films. But soon, he realized every scene had become a negotiation. A crew member remembered Mel had the energy of a man who'd never lost a battle. Ron had the patience of someone who refused to fight one. But make no mistake, Ron was fighting silently. The turning point came during the film's key kidnapping sequence. Mel halted production repeatedly, demanding rewrites and new blocking. Ron stood firm. He knew what Mel didn't. That tension is born not from chaos, but from restraint. Finally, he said quietly, "Give me one, take my way. If it doesn't work, we'll do it yours." That take became the film's emotional centerpiece. When Howard called cut, the set fell silent. Mel watched playback, then nodded. "You were right, Ron. It wasn't victory. It was mutual recognition between two men wired for control. Though Ransom succeeded, they never worked together again. Asked in 2015 if he'd reunite with Gibson, Ron smiled and said, "Some experiences are meant to happen once like lightning." From that storm, Howard drew a quiet creed. Sometimes you choose between winning an argument and keeping the ship afloat. For him, Ransom was two sails on the same boat, one wild with wind, one steady with balance. Their clash created art and scars. Years later, Howard reflected without bitterness, Mel's fierce, but he's also lonely. Maybe if he trusted someone besides himself, things might have been easier. To Ron, it wasn't resentment. It was a lesson in duality, two masters, one ship, and the understanding that brilliance shared between equals can move mountains but will always leave cracks in the hull. Every director has a moment that shatters their belief in legends. For Ron Howard, that moment bore one name, Marlon Brando. In the mid-1990s, Ron signed on to what sounded like a dream, directing the man who had redefined acting itself. Brando, the god of The Godfather and A Streetcar Named Desire, was older now, heavier, slower, but still regarded as Hollywood royalty. On paper, it was a once-in-a-lifetime honor. On set, it was a slow-motion disaster. Brando arrived 3 hours late on the first day, barefoot, wearing a robe, and asked bluntly, "Is my name above the director's on the contract?" It was the first sign that this wasn't going to be collaboration, it was going to be survival. He refused to learn lines, demanding cue cards placed everywhere taped to walls. Cameras. Even the cinematographer's back. "Don't ask me to memorize," he said. "I stopped doing that in 1972. Howard, who built his career on discipline and respect, tried to adapt. But Brando didn't want direction, he wanted to direct the director. He'd stop mid-scene, rewrite dialogue, or shift a tone from grief to comedy on a whim. Ron just stood there, hands behind his back. One crew member recalled. He never yelled, but you could feel the strain in the silence. The breaking point came during a simple dialogue scene. Brando walked off, vanished for 3 hours, then returned saying, "I think my character should die in this scene. Rewrite it." That was it. Howard quietly shut down production. The project collapsed. The film was never completed. Years later, when asked about Brando, Howard simply said, "Some legends are meant to be admired, not directed." Brando passed away in 2004, isolated and disillusioned. Howard, by then an Oscar-winning filmmaker, reflected not with bitterness, but sadness. I don't think he believed in art anymore. That's the tragedy of it. The experience taught Ron something profound: genius can destroy itself when it stops believing in creation. To him, Brando wasn't a villain, but a warning that the line between brilliance and self-destruction is perilously thin. From then on, Howard carried one unbreakable rule: no one is bigger than the story. It became his compass, the reason his sets remained steady, his actors loyal, and his films human. Because in a world obsessed with legends, Ron Howard chose to remain what he always was, a storyteller among gods.